So lately I've been thinking a lot about Jack White. And in particular, what I've been thinking about is what were the real specific ingredients that made Jack White's music work? Because actually, when you really look at the White Stripes, now I'm not talking about solo Jack White who's come out later now, I'm talking about the White Stripes. What was the secret? Because when you really think about it, it was actually a pretty phenomenal success that he had, especially because he really operated in the post 2000s era. This is a post Eminem era, post rap era, and this guy still remained utterly relevant. And at one point, he even worked with Alicia Keys. So he was really functioning as like this soul rock artist in this period when no other rock artists were really experiencing much success. So what the hell was it though? And he also, he gained the mainstream success. It wasn't like those emo bands that were popular at that time. Jack White was actually quite relevant, and he was also good because he seemed quite real. So what was it with him? He attracted some tough kids. It wasn't just like all the other rock music by that time. I don't know. Once you look aside from metal, it was all just kind of like the sensitive kids. But this guy was actually attracting kind of a rough crowd. So I was thinking about it a great deal, and then I was really looking at it. And of course, with Jack, there was this huge 1910s, 1920s blues influence. So what's so interesting about Jack's take on the blues is that the blues have been a major part of rock and roll, as everyone knows, since literally the 1950s with Elvis Presley. I mean, everyone knows that they're the foundation of rock and roll and all of this, yada, 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 yada. No one needs to go over that again. However, when you do look at the way he interpreted the blues, I did notice, really after years of looking at it, and I finally saw he did interpret them really radically differently than anyone else did. Because when you look at the major names of rock stars who have openly called out the blues influence, you basically see Jimmy Page, and then of course you see Eric Clapton, who's the biggest one of all, and then you do see the Stones, the Rolling Stones, and Keith Richards. Now, Keith Richards, I have a copy of Robert Johnson's complete recordings right here, and Keith Richards is on the back recommending it, I'm trying to say. So they're linked with this guy, but what's so interesting is that they didn't actually interpret him like Jack White interpreted him. And this is what's so fascinating about how an artist's legacy can come back to life in the strangest of ways, because it takes me a second to get the thought out. But you see, for the Rolling Stones, Robert Johnson and Son House and, Blind Willie McTell or Blind Willie Johnson, whatever old blues guy you want to name, more particularly Howlin' Wolf, of course, and Muddy Waters, who they took the band name from. They just were people who wrote some songs that they happened to occasionally cover as a sort of like nod. You get what I'm trying to say? So you can go see the Rolling Stones to this day. They'll play 15, 16 songs, and they might play 3 of them. Little Red Rooster from one of the guys, I'm a King Bee or something. They might play one of the old blues songs as a sort of nod. This is where it began. But when you look at the lyrics, they never actually took any inspiration from them. And strangely enough, it's even the same with Eric Clapton, who you think would have taken all of his inspiration from them, because Eric Clapton, unlike anyone in the Stones, actually mastered the way Robert Johnson played the blues, which is a very unique and particular way. And it's like, if you become a blues guitar player or a rock guitarist at all, you'll see immediately it's this big legend that exists within the community of some people are able to play them just like Johnson himself played them, because he played them in a very unique way. And you'll see that if you look up the videos of Eric Clapton playing them. It's a wonderful thing, because really it was very unique. But what's so strange is that when you look at Eric Clapton's other stuff, like Tears in Heaven, Wonderful Tonight, all the stuff he got hits for, you'll see that he takes almost next to no inspiration from Robert Johnson at all. Not only does he not sound anything like Robert Johnson, but he also doesn't sing lyrics like him. So this is the thing I started to focus on, because I was always, for so many years, I was just looking at Johnson from a guitarist standpoint. I occasionally tried to master the way he did the notes, the same way Eric Clapton did, so on and so forth, and I always played the songs, but you just sort of like, it's almost like rote memorization. You don't even think about what the hell the guy was singing. And then finally, though, I looked at him from a storyteller's point of view, and I said, wait a minute, these lyrics really were weird. So That's my next point. See, what happens is, when you look at most modern blues bands now, like the Tedeschi Trucks Band is very famous. It's a blues band that goes around now, and it's just a bunch of white people who are all playing, the blues kind of as they were, like once they got electrified. Because once the blues got electrified, the performers all started to sing about topics that are really similar to rap or even to rock and roll. We fly on jet planes and we drink wine and beer and we party with risque women and we play in, these dive bars and we wear expensive rings and shoes and all this, and that's great stuff. But and it also was present in Robert Johnson, but it also wasn't. And if you really look at his most significant songs, I'm saying, it actually wasn't, because when you look at him, like he has If I Had Possession Over Judgment Day, Preaching Blues, Up Jumped the Devil, his 3220 Blues, of course. I mean, you kind of see that in later blues. But Me and the Devil Blues, and, and Hellhound on My Trail, of course, is the main one. So when you really look at the Hellhound song, and then you also look at the Preaching Blues and the Possession Over Judgment Day, and Crossroad Blues, don't forget, what you start to see is that Robert Johnson did a style of lyric writing just because he was so superstitious, based at that time as he was in the Deep South and all of this. I mean, he literally probably really believed in Satan coming to get him, and he probably really believed in Judgment Day. I mean, he believed in this, as the day is long, this guy believed in it with his whole heart, I'm sure. As many people of the past did, and even still today. But the difference between someone today and someone of then was that this belief was so strong within not just Robert Johnson, but also his entire community, that he was able to actually get away with putting it in a song and people believed it. Like, you have to try to really go back in time and imagine that when he sang Hellhound on My Trail, people believed it. You got to try and say, like, you really have to try and focus in on that they really believed in this thing called the Hound from Hell. And what I was really obsessed with this particular reference for the past 2 weeks about it. I've kind of really just been thinking about it, like, yeah, Hellhound on his trail. Wow, this is so deep and so dark. And then it turns out, then I was also kind of simultaneously thinking about Jack White, and I didn't even remember it because I never listened to Seven Nation Army anymore at all. But, of course, I went back and listened to it this afternoon, and there it was. He does make a reference to the Hounds of Hell. So, I started to think, I said, well, this was what Jack White did. He did it not all the time, but he did it on that one song. That was the difference between him and the Stones and every other rock band. It wasn't just his sound, which was phenomenal and I could talk about for days and years. It was also the fact that he took lyrical inspiration from Robert Johnson. He took lyrical inspiration from Charlie Patton, from all whose songs are weird as fuck. Charlie Patton's songs are weird as fuck, lyrically speaking. I mean, they're just creepy. They're dark. It literally sounds like they're being performed in hell. So, I think, so now the next thing that this gets me onto is where I think now that rock inspiration should go next, and where it actually hasn't gone, because even I got all caught up in a train where I wasn't thinking so much about lyrics, I was just really thinking about the music, and I think most rockers are the same way, but I think the lyrical inspiration is the most important thing of all sometimes, and I think that's where it has to go next. I think it has to grab back into that old bag of superstition and make these songs about hounds from hell, about Satan knocking on the door, about angels falling from heaven, about demons running amok. It needs to bring ghosts and skeletons. It can get even stranger, because we don't have to be confined to what Johnson was confined to, where it was probably just something he hallucinated or something. Who the hell knows where he thought, So it doesn't even have to be confined to that. It could just be, I think that's it's almost like a Misfits sort of thing. That's really what actually came out of Jack White, but it was even better than the Misfits, because the Misfits didn't actually know shit about how to play the blues, and when you look at the way Jack White played the blues, he actually freed them. I think he liberated them. Not just because he actually wrote in the superstitions like the original guys did, and like no one else does now. Because I mean, if you look at the Tedeschi Trucks Band, I mean, they're not going to do that. If you look at Eric Clapton, he's not going to write lyrics like that. He's just not going to do it. He writes a nice song, but he doesn't write about that dark side of the religion, of Satan and Lucifer. That shit never gets written anywhere in rock and roll unless you're looking towards, what do you call it, metal. And metal doesn't even count again because it just doesn't, metal does not reach normal people. But Jack White did, because that was just, I don't know. And you just look at the way he played the blues, it was just so freaked out. I don't know, so that's kind of like what I had to say. I just think it was like a phenomenal thing that happened there. And I just kind of thought, like, I glimpsed it, and I just saw it. It was like, whoa, this is what he did. He wrote about this sort of stuff, these sort of lyrics. He took this inspiration just from these few songs. Just from these few songs that Johnson wrote. Just Hell Hound in My Trailer. Just took the inspiration from that. Because if you really, I mean, think about that as a movie. Try to think about that as a movie of a guy with a guitar running from hellhounds. Like, I was kind of trying to think of that even from the point of view of a novel or something, and that was kind of where it really all came together. This myth, there's so much there that could be taken from the fantasy element. You have to forget about the real stuff and focus on go to the fantasy level of it. Don't think about it as a real story. Think about it as a fantasy story and allow your imagination to just drift with it. About this weird guy in this weird southern world of the deep and dark and dangerous past and frightening past. And you'll start to see where the Jack White really took all his inspiration from. Because when you really look at it this right, like, you'll kind of think, just to go on a little bit further with it, you might say to yourself, well, come on, other rock bands were frightening. I mean, wasn't Nirvana or Pearl Jam kind of like dark and strange? But actually, they weren't even anywhere near Jack White's level for one prime reason. See, he took this, again, it's all about this American myth that this guy worked with. That Nirvana and Pearl Jam never would have worked with. For instance, they would have never written lyrics when he wrote how he did about Wichita, Kansas. You know, I'm going to Wichita, far from this opera forevermore. I'm going to work the straw, make the sweat drip out of every pore. And if you're bleeding, then you're bleeding, then you're bleeding right before the Lord. He really used all this old, like, preacher language, which kind of hooked him into this country world, but he wasn't doing a country sound, so it was, like, really weird. Because then the only other place you kind of get that same shot is if you go to Johnny Cash, you know, God's going to cut you down or something. Johnny Cash puts that all in, those preacher elements. And so do countless other country artists. But the problem is they're not putting those dark rock beats behind it. I mean, and Johnny Cash kind of tried. If you look at the American recordings, he kind of does it. But it's not like Jack White. Because this guy was actually rocking. So this is real weird, because it's really all just a matter of, yes, it all has been done somewhere in a certain spot, but it hasn't ever been combined into this, do you get what I'm saying? So it was never combined, but someone was preaching over a rock beat like that. That was what was so weird about it. And the way he was dressed, everything was just sometimes something just goes right, and it just fused. So that was what was strange about that. And that was what was so different than Nirvana, because when you look back at Nirvana, what was it? He wasn't, all the topics he was complaining about really were all, you know, don't get me wrong, it's a great band, but actually it does seem kind of childish in comparison to Jack White, strangely enough, in comparison to Seven Nation Army. That shit seems like it's going to survive, because it seems like it's connected to this long train of American tradition with these dark songs and everything, and Nirvana just actually kind of falls out of that as it kind of exists, and so does Pearl Jam. They kind of exist in this other lousy world that doesn't connect with anything that came before them, because what's happening is with them, see, for not for 100 years, but literally for about 40 years, all the inspiration that those rockers were taking all kind of just jump-started in the 60s. They didn't even look at the 50s. They'd all just jump-started in the 60s. If you look at where Cobain was taking all his influence, he was taking it all from the Beatles. So he wasn't looking back. He didn't really look, he made that reference to Lead Belly, but he didn't really take anything from him. You know? That's another one. He made a reference to him, but he didn't take nothing from him. It was like maybe he would have in the future. He was maybe just getting started with it, and then it faded out. So no one was really taking that inspiration. You know, they were all just taking it from the 60s onward, not putting anything in about the Hellhounds or nothing, because that was all very early rock stuff when it was still kind of a preacher thing. Because actually, if you read the story of Johnson, you'll come to find out that when he was on his deathbed, supposedly, he wrote a fucking note saying that he renounced rock music or blues music at the time because they thought it was going to make him burn in hell if he died a blues musician. I mean, these people literally wholeheartedly believed that this music was evil. So I think that everyone needs to go back to that. Not everyone, but, you know, whoever. I think an artist needs to remember that, myself included. And you just sort of look at it and, okay, yeah, this is what I have to remember. This superstition that was originally there in rock and roll that has now been lost. Rock and roll maybe wasn't ever meant to be the spot where the only songs sung are about pretty little horses and pretty nights with some lady or flying on a jet plane like half the Rolling Stones songs are about. Or it's even worse now when you look at bands like freaking Nickelback and everything. I mean, it's even worse what it descended into. So I think that's my idea now. That's my consensus, my thesis statement. That's what I had to say. So, ciao.